Welcome to number 4 in this series of how it all began 60 years ago. In this episode, everybody gets fired and my dad gets blackballed. I'm Eric Reese. I sell real estate for a living, but I fly and instruct in the Aerostar for fun. Join us on our travel and training adventures in the world's fastest light piston twin. There's a funny story, somewhat embarrassing for you. And it actually we'll talk a little bit about the systems too, because it's kind of interesting how this happened. And if you understand the systems, it's like, why did that happen? And Ted Smith's reaction to this. So tell him the story of jumping into the airplane. You were going to move it somewhere, I think, but talk to me about that.
Well, that goes back in the very beginning when we first moved the blue airplane, the #1 airplane, to Van Nuys Airport before we built the production facilities. And we were operating out of a hangar doing all the test flying. And I was still messing with the engines and this kind of thing, design-wise. Well, yeah. So I had gone out there, and the airplane was sitting outside the hangar on the gear, obviously. And I wanted to start the engines up. I forgot why, for some reason, just to check them out. So I hopped in, started the engine up, and then there goes nose gear collapses. And of course we caught the props. And what had happened, unbeknown to me, and I guess I should have caught this, but that was the last thing in my mind to go through a checklist when I wasn't going to fly the airplane. I was just wanting to start up the airplane and up the engines and then shut them back down again. So I didn't think to check to see if the gear was down, the gear handle was down. But what had happened, someone had put that gear handle up and left the airplane sitting outside on his gear with the gear handle up.
And they obviously had to know kind of something about the systems, because in order for that to happen, all the hydraulic pressure had to be 0.
Yeah.
Because otherwise, if there was any hydraulic pressure at all with the gear handle in the up position, it would have unlocked the nose gear and it would have collapsed.
If nothing else, as Eric points out, you have an accumulator in the hydraulic system that stores fluid under pressure, pressurized by air, and the purpose of that is to take away the hydraulic shocks as you're operating the different hydraulic systems, so you don't have a sudden shock to the system. So there's build-up pressure in that accumulator that is still there after you shut off the hydraulic pumps that can provide pressure enough to
well, that brings up an interesting question. Did the first Aerostar, #1, have an accumulator in it?
Yes.
Okay, so it was.
Oh yeah.
Okay, so that's it. You had mentioned, I think earlier when we were talking about there'd been some vandalism and about with the airplane, and somebody what we call keyed today, but they basically scratched the windows and paint, things like that, and you're wondering, well, maybe this was vandalism. But if it was, they had to have known how the system worked.
As Eric's pointed out, they have to know the system
to
realize what's going on. Otherwise, if they had put that gear handle up while the airplane was sitting on the ramp, and there was still pressure in the accumulator, which eventually bleeds off as the airplane is sitting there, that nose gear would have come up.
Yep.
So either they understood, or that airplane had been sitting out there a long time, and then someone came along and for some reason put the gear handle up. But anyway, I felt embarrassed because as a pilot, I should have checked that, but I wasn't going to fly the airplane. It was just sitting there. All I wanted to do was start the engines up. I wasn't going through any pre-flight or anything else.
Well, you designed the gear, and you knew that if it's sitting on the ground and it's not running, the hydraulic pressure's there to keep the gear down. And so it's like it wouldn't have even come to a thought.
So anyway, so TR showed up right about then, or he may have been there when it started. Of course, I got the props, so it was expense-wise some major damage because the engines weren't running at any kind of pressure, just idle. It didn't hurt the engines any, but it had the no props.
Yep. Today, if that happened, that's considered a prop strike.
Yeah.
And Lycoming's mandatory, I don't remember what service bulletin it is, but if you have a prop strike, it's a mandatory teardown.
Yeah. Well, it may have been that too,
Yeah.
although we were test flying. And I was under the airplane when TR showed up, and the crew people hold the nose up so I could get the nose gear back down again so we could get it where it belonged. And TR saw me and he said, "Dick, get out of there, that's too dangerous." That's all he said. He didn't shoot me out, he didn't do anything. And again, that's TR, I think that shows the experience that he'd had over the years. And he had probably been through things like that himself in flight testing the different aircraft that he had been involved in, and realized these things just happen. And if he starts, to repeat myself on the previous thing, if he starts chewing people out for this, then he's not going to have people that are going to try anything for him anymore. It just, so anyway, I really hand it to him for understanding people in that respect. That was embarrassing to me, but it
showed
one of those things that happen.
Yeah.
Well, I'm kind of getting to how we get into production. From there, well, I guess we didn't touch on this before, but anyway, so you could not test fly the airplane at a Van Nuys airport, just part of the airport regulations. So we did all the taxi tests at Van Nuys, but we had to fly at Fox Field at Edwards Air Force Base, or Bobby, or
Lancaster,
to do the first 5 takeoffs and landings before we could come back to Van Nuys and do the rest of our flight testing. So we flew over to Fox Field, did that, and Burt Bannell was the pilot. He had been, I think, chief pilot for North America maybe, and had did all the flight test work for Ted Smith for the Aero Commander series of aircraft. So they were very close friends, very good pilot, very nice guy. So he was doing the first takeoff from Van Nuys to go to Fox Field, and TR was in the right seat, and Burt Bannell was in the left seat flying the airplane. Take it off, and the engine started cutting in and out. So TR said to Burt, "Don't worry about that, that's just part of the system, that'll go away as soon as it warms up a little bit." And Burt had enough experience as a test pilot to realize you don't want to take a chance on a brand new airplane that hadn't been flown yet. So he immediately did a 180, which is a no-no when you're teaching people to fly. If the engine fails, you go straight ahead. But he had enough experience to realize he could get that airplane back down again without crashing. So he did a 180 and landed downwind. And what had happened is that, and this was just not thinking ahead, but is doing the things that most other general aviation aircraft did. We had the fuel filter, I kind of forgot the right name for it, but anyway, the fuel filter mounted on the engine side of the firewall, which it was getting the heat of the engine. And what had happened as the engine heated up, because the cowling we designed was a very, part of the design of the cowling, I wanted to keep the cowling to where it looked aerodynamically smooth and sleek, to keep the looks of the airplane to where it was a sleek looking airplane. A lot of cowling is bulky and everything else, and it just, effort doesn't go into making the thing look good. So because it was a tight cowling, it meant that things got hot in there quicker.
Mm-hmm.
Even though it was the exhaust system was designed to create a negative pressure through Venturi principle and didn't require cowl flaps, but it's still, in the engine heats up. So anyway, what had happened is because the heat in the engine compartment, it heated the fuel up in the fuel strainer, or whatever it was called, and that vaporized, and that's the reason the engine was cutting in and out. So as soon as we got back, I realized immediately what was going on. So we simply moved that to the back side of the firewall, which we did that afternoon, then flew again the next morning. Everything ran fine. But thanks to Burt Bannell, he understood you get the airplane back and not go ahead and hope it'll straighten itself out. So we did continue to do the test flying there, and during that test flying is when we made the hard landing. We went through that in the gear.
Now, was that at Van Nuys or at Fox?
No, that's Van Nuys.
Okay. So
all after the first 5 touch and goes at Fox, everything else was done at Van Nuys. And as we started to get into production, and this is not telling anything negative about TR at all, but he put too much emphasis on promoting the airplane and getting immediate sales rather than, I felt at least, and I'm a novice at the time, rather than getting the production line flowing smoothly before cranking it up to get all these airplanes out to meet all these commitments that he'd promised the first customers. They had put down payments, I think, for the full price of the airplane. So they're waiting for the airplane. But, you know, think of these people wanted the Aerostar. It was a good liquor. They would have waited if TR, but he wasn't patient. He wanted to get those airplanes out. So as we started down the production line, at that time, TR kept the engineering at Northridge. So we didn't have engineering yet at Van Nuys production line. He had moved a couple of my people out there doing that, changing the development drawings into production drawings. But what he did in order to get airplanes out, in his desire to meet his commitments to his customers to get airplanes delivered, he was impatient, I felt, and he pushed the airplanes through, and there were all kinds of little problems at each station as it went through that all had to be fixed after the airplanes got out of the production line. In many cases, the airplane had to be torn apart again to fix whatever problems, and obviously that's expensive and very time consuming. So I took it upon myself, again, I just using common sense. I think TR again had gone to Hawaii time. But I took it upon myself, not involved with production. He'd already brought some of the people from Oklahoma, from the Aero Commander days, to handle production. So actually, unbeknown to them too, I took my key engineering guys, about 4 or 5 of them, and after work, we got each of the people at each of the stations of the production line to stay so they could be interviewed by my engineering guys, so we could find out specifically what the problems were at each station. The thinking being we could fix those, and with one airplane going through, and then start the production thing up again to make it so it's efficient rather than all this stuff that was going on. So with their report that they got back from the 5 or 6 different stations, I kind of forgot how many, I wrote up a report, and by then Butler Aviation, American Cement had sold the company to Butler Aviation, and General Bill Martin was president of the company, and by then they'd fired Ted Smith and Ron Smith, and I'll tell that story in a minute. But anyway, he got the report, and he said, "Boy, Dick, I wish we'd had this a long time ago. That's exactly what we should be doing." And if we had done that, and it's retrospect, of course, but I think a lot of the problems we had, and I think, quite honestly, they were carried on into Santa Maria. We were forcing stuff through that production line rather than get the problem solved and then going with it. When TR got back from Hawaii, he found out that Butler Aviation had fired him and Ron, his son, and put Bill Martin in place. In fact, when Butler Aviation bought it from American Cement, they fired everyone at Ted Smith, everyone, all the production people, everyone. And I went home that Friday night without a job, and went to Sue and said, "Honey, we don't have a job anymore. What are we going to do?" Well, about 11 that night, Ralph Harmon, who was Paul Dopp of Butler Aviation, had made president of the new company, which they had also bought Mooney Aircraft, called me and said, "Dick, we'd like you to come down and meet with myself and Paul Dopp at some hotel in near UCLA. I could forgotten that city, but anyway, this is 11 at night." So I went down there, and there they were, and they said, "Well, Dick, the reason you're here, we want to bring you back on board, and we've already talked to the head of production and the head of marketing, and we're going to have them come on board. What we want you to do is Monday morning make up the list of the people that you'd like to bring back on board, so we can rehire them. But Ron Smith is not going to be, or Ron or TR is not going to go on them. We have fired them."
Well, thanks again for watching. It's been a lot of fun making these, and I've really enjoyed all the comments everybody has kind of put up there on the channel. And I'll keep doing more of these when I get the opportunity. So please like, subscribe, and ring the bell so you'll see more. I'd sure appreciate it.